questions, we can deal with Auckland Transport more with a full team in a CCO meeting. But thank you for that. Councillor Stewart. Councillor Stewart, we had a question from you?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, that's good. Okay. Well, thank you for that. Are you aware of all the ghost buses that are travelling around out east at the moment? And why I'm saying that, wouldn't it be sensible to reduce some of the bus services when we know that there's so many buses that are empty? I can every day I could stand for hours and see nobody on the buses. So what's your suggestion there?
That's a really, really good question. And so if I answer it from two lenses, one is we're acutely aware of the ghost buses. If I give you, I guess, two ways we're thinking about it. One is Mark Lambert's talked about recasting the network. What that essentially means, and this is probably starting to link more to next year's budget, but we were forecasting to put on a new tranche of buses later towards this financial year and also into next. What we're thinking at the moment is we won't necessarily add all of those new buses to the network. We'll start shifting buses around across different routes to, I guess, effectively not have to add as many new ones because we know there's the significant surplus capacity, right? The other piece that links to that is we're looking at the fare strategy and how do we create more off-peak, on-peak sort of differentiation. So do you charge more for peak versus off-peak? How do we start shifting? Because all the cost gets driven by that peak vehicle requirement at rush hour. So that's the second bit. The third bit I'd just say, and this is the really interesting piece that's, I guess, hot off the press, Jane was just sharing with the AT board, which is on today's, our on-demand trial in the south. The on-demand services we've just put on are actually now carrying more passengers than the previous bus routes, the buses that were running those services for a fraction of the cost. So I guess if you add those three bits together, we see, as we're thinking about next year's budget, that we don't need to potentially add as many services. Sorry, as many physical buses, I should say, but you optimise the number of buses we've got more by having less running at peak, getting better coverage across the city, plus looking at more opportunity to potentially bring in on demand.
Thank you. And thanks, Councillor. I think we've all had comments around that in our ward. Councillor Casey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, I have a wonderful idea for you to optimise revenue. It's coming up to Christmas. We've got summer coming. There are 106,000 registered dogs in Auckland whose humans would love to take the bus. Now, why don't you give us all a great Christmas present? I've only got 10 months left of my term of office. It's been 3.5 years since Auckland Council unanimously asked Auckland Transport to allow access for pets. So what do you think?
I might slightly avoid. I'm the finance guy. I think financially it probably has merit, but I think that is one I could take back and have a chat with our team internally. I know this one's been raised a number of times in the past.
What a good answer. That was a very positive response. You hear that, Madam Chair? Thanks, Mark.
I did. Thank you. Right, I've got no further questions, but I do have, I'll move now to comments. And my first comment is from Councillor Coombe.
Oh, thanks, Madam Chair, but I don't want to jump ahead of Angela.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Councillor Dalton.
Apologies.
It's okay, Papa can go.
No, sorry, my fault. Councillor Dalton, birthday girl goes first. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks, Pippa. Thanks, Susley. Hey, I just really just in terms of the finances, I attended the AT board meeting this morning for an hour, and it was really clear to me, well, a couple of things actually. Just picking up on what Councillor Walker was talking about around marketing and comms, board was really clear about how the messaging needs to change to be around behaviour change and mode change, and really invested in that. And that's what they will be focusing on. And I do remember, I know this wasn't about return to PT, but I do remember that workshop where we talked about the campaign for return to PT, but the focus is on behaviour change. So I listened to the Chair's report, the CEO's report, and the speed reduction bylaw. Really important work, and a lot of investment in that as well, about keeping our streets safe. So in the first tranche, they had 8,000 submissions. They're expecting probably double that. That's a huge amount of work, which obviously costs money to do, but just making the point that there is a lot of money going into some outcomes that we have asked for. And I would support the recommendation here that we continue our financial support to ensure that those good bits of work can go through and progress. But I think my point was, we sit in these meetings and then we get criticised quite a lot about what we don't do, with no thought to how much time that we do put into the discussions that we have. And I just reflected on that as I was listening to the AT board and to the CEO and others, that when you're there listening to the output, there's a significant amount of work going on to try and achieve Auckland Council's direction given to AT. So thank you, Mark. I support your request for $50 million from somewhere. Thank you.
Up to, Councillor, up to.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. And now, look, overnight I decided to do a bit of a technology upgrade with some equipment in my home, which was clearly a fail. But in doing so, my comments bar doesn't scroll down. So the Deputy Chair, how could I miss one of the most important members of this committee for a question? So I will return back to you, Councillor Henderson, for your question.
Thank you, Chair. Now you've hyped up this question. I hope it's a good one. Yeah, so I've received some inquiries around reduced Auckland Transport bus routes in December and January. So I just wanted to kind of just check, is this for financial reasons, or is there more more of an operational decision?
Principally financial.
Trying to save some money over summer?
Well, we've obviously, if you come back to the ghost bus comment, and obviously we've had targets, so we've got to save money in every part of the business. Is how do we optimize the use of the buses we've got? And part of what we've been doing is reducing frequency on certain key routes, because there's just the number of ghost buses that are travelling.
Okay, that's cool. And just a quick comment while I've got the floor. As a very recent dog owner, I reckon Councillor Casey's really onto something there. I just put my support behind that too. Thanks, Chair.
Indeed, me too. Okay, thank you for that, and apologies. And now we'll go back to Councillor Coombe. Thanks, Councillor, for your patience.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I do feel like I'm slacking hearing about birthday girl Councillor Dalton going to the AT board meeting this morning. Suddenly like, oh, is that somewhere I should have been? But I do, in speaking in support of this, I do particularly want to focus on the optimising revenue, and I'm going to make sure that I make this a financial commentary, because there's a number of points I just want to make about what's happening in the city centre. And Councillor Walker, you continue to refer to the city centre as a CBD. We don't have a CBD anymore. It's a city centre that has 40,000 residents living in it, and it's a really important distinction. And in terms of, it was really good that we've had both our finance people here, Pramod and Mark, because I've really appreciated their very clear responses to the questions about what we can be doing better to be optimising the revenue. And at the moment, we have got parking buildings that have got masses of capacity, and there might be a separate discussion about how we can be doing more campaigns to encourage use of those. But we've also got this really big issue that in the city centre, because enforcement didn't get underway as soon as level 3 started for whatever operational decision, probably to be nice to people, but it's had this counterproductive impact, and that there's now this attitude that you can just park everywhere, and it's a massive issue all across our shared spaces, up on curves, damaging our beautiful new spaces. And it really does upset me when I hear councillors talk about how terrible the city centre is, when it's looking really amazing. It's had a big scrub up over lockdown. People want to come in and see the lights. It has been a massive struggle for businesses in the city centre. I think I heard that it was $1 billion hit that they've taken. So this is the time that we've got to really put a comprehensive approach in place that will get people using the parking buildings that we've got, so we maximise our revenue there, get the drivers out of our shared spaces, get the income from enforcement, which is never revenue raising. It's about making places safer and more attractive to be, because the more we let this get out of hand, we're going to have all of this negative impact on the city centre, on visitors, on the residents that live there, and this impact on revenue that we're hearing about. And I do think we need to really do a deeper dive into how we're maximising our assets, our return on our assets. And it's great to hear that Auckland Transport is pursuing that. So I just wanted to really raise this as an issue, because it's also going to have an impact on our budgets around having to keep replacing our assets that are getting damaged. It's going to put people off coming into the city centre if they're feeling they're not safe in our shared spaces that now have this beautiful lighting. So I really, really want to, I'm glad that we've got the C in there, that we're requesting Auckland Transport to optimise those revenue opportunities. And I'm sure it goes beyond parking, but I just really needed to take this opportunity to focus on this issue around the parking enforcement, because every single day I'm getting tagged into complaints, as is Councillor Hills and other councillors. And we just shouldn't, we've got to get it sorted. That is not the best way that we can be dealing with Auckland Transport, is this constant beat up on Twitter. So I just felt I needed to raise that today, so that the public know that we're really concerned about the issue. We can see how it's having an impact on our revenue, and that we've got a joined up approach to dealing with that. Also just wanted to support in terms of optimising revenue, what Mark said about we've really got to relook at park and rides. And those councillors who are great champions for climate action seem to have a blind spot when it comes to looking at the evidence around park and rides, and how we just cannot give away valuable resources for free that undermine our whole response, that discourages people using public transport, that don't optimise the assets that we have. Let those who need to drive get into park and rides. And as I've often said, this has a particular impact on women who need to arrive later at park and rides, who might have different trip needs, and it really undermines our what we're trying to do with reducing our climate emissions. So I know that that's a conversation for when we're sort of normal. We're in a very volatile time at the moment. We're still dealing with the pandemic, but I just think the planning has to get underway now, so that when we see people coming back commuting, that we use the park and rides in a way. We use demand responsive pricing, so that is in place, so that it's actually helping those drivers that need to park, need to get there early or later, that can get access into the park and rides, but we're also then getting the revenue from that really valuable resource that we've all invested in. So I did just want to kia kaha, Mark, and Auckland Transport for your work around that issue. I know it's very emotive, but if we just take an evidence-based approach to looking at that issue, and I hope all councillors will be open to that evidence, the surveying work that you've already done, that we can come up with a solution that everyone can see that this is a win-win for drivers, for PT, and for the whole community. So I just would like to see that happening. So I hope, Deputy Mayor, you're happy that I have asked that. I have made my comments in a way that is emphasising that this is a discussion about AT's budget, and this is about supporting that 50 million. The whole, I totally appreciate that it's been a very difficult time and there's a lot of moving parts. So I just wanted to add my support for AT, not only minimising costs, but also maximising and optimising the revenue opportunities that we have available that we haven't confronted up to this point, but this is the time to do it. So thank you, Madam Chair, for that opportunity to speak in support. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor. And I think the last comment I have is in the name of Councillor Hills.
Thank you, Chair. And I first just want to clarify, and I know it doesn't matter, but it's not ghost buses, it's ghost passengers. Ghost buses is when the buses don't turn up. If there's no passengers, they're ghost passengers because the buses are not ghosts. But I've heard it, lots of people say it over the last couple of months, and it's just a random thing. Sorry, you can probably hear Theo. It always happens when I turn my mute button off. I'm very disappointed that we have to provide this additional funding to Auckland Transport, and it's not because I don't think they need it. It's because I believe that the government should have, and I'm hoping they still will, should have provided this income for us. It's not anyone's fault. It's not the government's fault. It's not anyone's fault that we're in this situation. But if you think of what has been divvied out as support for business and for the region and for people, individuals during this outbreak, I think this makes up less than, or it's about 0.5% or just under 1% of the overall budget the government has had to put out for this outbreak. So I believe that we have shouldered a lot of this outbreak as a city, but also as an organisation, and I believe and I hope that the government will provide that income that we need. And I do want to thank Auckland Transport for still providing these services, because all those bus drivers were putting themselves at risk throughout the outbreak and still are. Those services, those buses that had ghost passengers, actually, I did see a lot of passengers on those buses during lockdown, often in nurses' uniforms, often in fluoros going to work. There was a lot of people who need those buses, older people, people with disabilities, young people, those who don't have cars, and those buses and ferries stayed going the whole time, and made sure people had access to food and healthcare. I know I was helping people figure out their routes to testing stations during that time. Those buses were lifesavers for many people. So just want to say, although that income is significant, it's fantastic that we had those buses, even though they weren't full, and they still aren't because people are afraid, that kept going. So thank you so much to Auckland Transport and all the drivers and everyone who was doing that mahi throughout lockdown, while many of us obviously had to stay home. So secondly, I just want to say I hope that they continue and will keep growing. And I think part of the PR and part of the mix needs to be 170 locations popped up on our buses and ferries, and not one driver or passenger caught COVID from those journeys. So I think it's important that's part of the message, that we tell people that, as far as we know, the evidence says that transmission on our buses is very, very unlikely, and hopefully people come back to PT. But people will not come back to PT. I've had a lot of complaints already, people going back to work if they're not frequent enough. So there is a tipping point in there somewhere. People will not come back to public transport if their bus used to be every 15 minutes, but now it's every hour. They're not going to go to the ferries if they're all at different times. So I understand why the buses are empty, because we're trying to make sure people know that those services are available. Otherwise, they won't come back. So there is a tipping point where we are going to spend some money, and what to the public looks like wasted money. But if we don't get people back to PT by showing them it's an attractive option which they can rely on like they used to, we won't ever get those people back. So yes, we do have to spend a bit of money to get people back on public transport, but it will happen in time, and it's happened overseas, and we just have to make sure that people know that it's fairly safe to do so, and we'll continue those distancing and masking rules as much as possible. Want to back up Pippa's comment. We do get tagged every day, and we get abused every day around the parking, and I do understand people's reluctance of maybe ticketing people in timed or paid parking areas, but when people are parked in illegal areas where you're not supposed to park at all, such as right in the front of shops, on shared spaces, up against the seating and crushing new plants and trees that the ratepayers have spent thousands or millions on in some situations, I think that's unacceptable. And we do have to find a way through that. And as Councillor Coombs says, it will help increase our PT revenue, our parking revenue, and in short term, it will have that increase in revenue on writing those tickets. If there is an issue with safety, I know Federal and a few other streets, they have automatic ticketing with the cameras. If you park illegally on the footpaths or in the areas there are stationary cameras which find people, so then you do reduce the risk to our parking enforcement officers who are doing a fantastic and difficult job out there. But I know that the city centre, it is dangerous in a lot of those shared spaces now, because I've seen it. The other day I was in town and there was 20 or 30 cars parked where you would normally walk. So everyone's walking in the middle where the cars are going, and then you're stuck between trucks and other things. So although it's a strategy issue and an operational issue, it's definitely a revenue issue as well. But I just want to thank Auckland Transport again. Definitely support this because we do not have another choice, but I do hope the government's going to come on board ASAP and give us that support too. But, you know, we are going to have to continue to fund these services at a loss until we get people back on them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Sandra, could you please reorder the C, make C A, B, and then A, C. Not that it's important, but look, in closing comments, I just want to thank Auckland Transport very much. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, finding your own cost savings. I want to thank you for the work you're doing alongside the Mayor and others on talking to central government about their assistance. Gosh, if we knew what we knew, if we knew back then when we set the budget for the recovery budget, what we knew then, what we know now, it would look very different, which is why I've still got some concerns around our annual budget coming up. But I want to thank you for the work that you're doing, trying to make us the giver of last resort, for want of a better word, the funder of last resort. So to that end, it's been moved and seconded, and I will now take it to the vote.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can we just check? So the request, the approve the funding that is currently B, that becomes C, is that correct?
That's the last one, yep, sorry.
Thanks, Kalinda, thank you.
Yep, sorry, yeah. Just make sure you try to do everything else. And it was up to, I just want to make it very clear, Mark, are you listening? Up to?
Very clear.
Yeah, thank you. Keep smiling and carry on, keep calm and carry on. Okay, sorry, I'm back to the vote. It's been moved and seconded. I will take it on the voices. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to item 9, which is a asset recycling item, and it is about a property in Titoki Street in Parnell. And I welcome Chantel and Ross Churnside to introduce this item. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Chair. Actually, Anthony Lewis is going to talk to the detail of the item. So can I just pass over to Anthony, please?
Okay. Good morning.
Sure,
Anthony.
Hopefully you can see me. I've got my blue Iki Panuku shirt on, so hopefully you can see that. Good morning. Good to see the committee after such a long time. What we have here is an area of stocked road on Titoki Street, Parnell. It is adjacent to the domain, but has never been part of the domain. It is surrounded on 3 sides by the adjacent landowner who is seeking to acquire it. It looks like they've probably been maintaining it for at least 40 years. There is no public access to the site. There are a number of significant trees adjacent in the domain and in the road reserve. The trunks are not in the site, however, the drip line and possibly the root extent may extend into the site. However, there are existing Auckland Unitary Plan tree protection rules which would limit and protect the trees there. There's also a railway line under the site and under the adjacent private land, which would restrict development in terms of geotech restrictions. So, and that would restrict what the adjacent landowner could actually put into the site. We have consulted with Mana Whenua. One iwi entity did advise it was of some significance. We did make quite clear in the consultation that we could only sell the site to the adjacent landowner. We've had further discussions with that iwi entity, and they're pretty happy with just their notification of their significance being handed over to any future purchaser. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Anthony. I'll start off with the first question, if I may. There is in the report mention the fact that the trees, the drip line of the trees, are you confident that the resolution that we have that I put up in C protects? I know the trees are not on the property that's being sold, but are you confident that the resolution in C looks after the drip line of the great trees that are on on our land.
Yeah, sure. We can certainly add something like a consent notice requiring any purchaser to get appropriate approval should they choose to do any work on the site and on the rest of their site, because their property extends down the length of the domain as well. So it would impact not only on the area for disposal, but also the rest of their one domain drive property.
So you are suggesting another resolution, are you, or a stronger resolution?
No, resolution C is fine.
The resolution C is fine. Okay, thank you. Councillor Walker, question from you?
Yes, I have a question. Has there been any consideration given to any form of protection, like having a covenant over the trees or over the land, or requiring that as a condition? And the reason I ask that question is that we know that the existing protections under the unitary plan are not proving effective, because we're seeing wholesale removal of trees. The penalties and the like are completely insufficient, and the monitoring and the enforcement is not there. So my question is around, are we exploring avenues such as covenanting to protect trees in this instance?
Through the chair, so the trees are actually in the domain or in the road reserve. They're not actually in this site.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the key point, Wayne. So the trees are actually on our land, and it was just the drip line that was of concern, and C deals with that.
I understand that, Madam Chair. Having said that, we could have, for example, a covenant over the area of the drip line of the trees, because I would suggest that if we don't have the strongest form of protection, frankly, the unitary plan just doesn't cut it, and our existing protections don't cut it. So is that something that we have explored, Madam Chair? That's my question.
Madam Chair, it's Letitia Edwards here from Iki Panuku. I'm also on the call just waiting for our next item. If I could just intervene here, yes, that's certainly something that will be explored as part of the sales process. Should this property be approved for sale? As Anthony has mentioned, the trees in question are not on the site in particular, are not specifically on the site. However, as part of the sales process, we can undertake numerous options to ensure that the trees on the adjacent council-owned site are protected. That may include covenanting them, and it may include having a consent requirement, so that there's, should this land be developed, approvals would have to be sought from council as the adjoining owner. So we do have numerous options. If it is approved for sale, we will certainly work through what is the best option for this property. And I think, Madam Chair, your proposed resolution or recommendation 3 beautifully captures the options that we can potentially look into, and that we will.
Thank you for that answer. I really appreciate that, Letitia. Thank you. I should move it, and Councillor Fletcher, yes, I'd be delighted for you to second it. Thank you. Any other questions? Any comments? Well, I'll just have a brief...
Madam Chair,
I
had a request for a comment in the sidebar, but it's only brief.
Sorry, yes, please have a comment, Councillor. Sorry, my sidebar is just not working. I'm going to have to do it a different way. Thank you.
Oh, Madam Chair, I'm so excited because I have an identical Lenovo to council laptop, which I operated yesterday for the first time, and I have connectivity, and it's just made a real difference. All I wanted to comment on, Madam Chair, is I'm familiar with this particular site. I don't believe that we are going to compromise the amenity of any Aucklander by the disposal of this. And I am extremely mindful of the perilous state of our finances and the uncertainty that we have with COVID. So I just want the assurance and that from Anthony that we are going to optimise the sale. There will be some value for the neighbouring property that wishes to acquire it. So on the basis that we are getting value for money out of that site, I feel comfortable with it, and I thank you for going ahead with the additional C that will actually afford some protection, and for Letitia's assurances on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm just making sure I've got no comments. No. Right. I'm not going to add to that. You've said it all very eloquently. Thank you. So I will now take it to the vote, being moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Fletcher. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. We now move to item 10, which is another disposal, this time in Ponsonby, and I welcome Andrew, Philip and Letitia to present the item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I could just make some very brief introductions. First of all, my colleague Andrew Alcote, who has recently joined us at Eke Paunuku Development Auckland as a portfolio specialist, and also my colleague Philip Lim from Auckland Transport, who we've been working jointly with on this proposal. I'll hand over to Andrew from here. Oh, sorry, Andrew, I think you might be muted.
Yeah, Andrew, we can't hear you. Woo.
Sorry, I'm here. Thank you, Letitia, and good morning, everyone. So we're here to seek approval to dispose of 2 Pompelia Terrace in Ponsonby to enable its redevelopment utilising the principles of service property optimisation. So AT and Eke Panuku have worked with the adjoining owner Urban Collective on a proposal that enables council to retain its ownership in a 43 space basement car park and an upgraded public toilet facility. And the developer will be able to make use of the airspace to create a plaza which will remain open to the public and also enable them to extend their mixed use development. The key considerations that we've been working through is future-proofing the basement car park as a flexible space that is able to be reconfigured based on changing transport needs. And the second consideration was ensuring that sufficient protections were put in place or can be put in place to enable ongoing public access throughout the plaza. This proposal has been workshopped and gone through the Waitemata local board, and they've formally endorsed it. And yes, I think the report is read and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you and welcome to your role. We have a question first up from Councillor Coon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou. Nice to see you all this morning. I have 2 partai, if I may. The first one is just checking that Eke Panuku, is Eke Panuku aware that there's a legacy parking fund of approximately $400,000 that's left over from the old Auckland City Council development contributions, and it's tagged to parking? And if so, was any consideration given to how that parking fund could be used to optimise this development in terms of securing outcomes for the public?
Thank you, and through the chair, I wasn't aware of any parking fund, so no, it hasn't been considered at this point, but it's definitely something that we'll be able to look into.
Yeah, it would be great through you, Madam Chair. I think it's one of those funds that keeps getting forgotten about, and a big chunk of it has been used for the Motat car park, and it's this committee that signs off the release of those funds, but it goes through the local board. So it's just, I think, have it in your back pocket for when there's another potential development, perhaps in the future, that you could leverage those funds. Just a second question, if I may. Just in terms of, I support this in terms of this is an opportunity for leveraging this site, and it's good to see it progressed. It was actually something I suggested to Auckland Transport back when I was on the local board, but of course at that time it just went into a black hole because there wasn't an agency that could really look at these things in a holistic way. So it's great to see Eke Panuku progress it. But I don't see anywhere in the report or any indication that there's been a discussion with Auckland Transport about optimising the public car parking on this site presents an opportunity for the road corridor for Ponsonby Road, and that this opens up a conversation about that we're here investing in a car park, so this means we can look at the corridor in a different way. And I just wanted to make sure that that is being flagged. Well, I guess my question is, how is this going to be highlighted to the businesses, to the community, that the investment in this car park does mean that in the future, when the road corridor is looked at, there might be reallocation of the parking on the road corridor in favour of more public space, active modes, PT, and that this is kind of a trade-off for this investment.
Sorry, through the chair, Philip, can we please ask you to respond to that question since it's an AT-related matter?
Sure. So Ponsonby Road is identified in the Future Connect program as a bus priority improvement for bus priority improvements, and it's funded through the RLTP for through connected communities in the first decade for both bus and cycling improvements. So, but in terms of actually communicating that to the community, Letitia, have we made any communication via the local board or anything like that?
So sorry, I can jump in here. So we have reached out to the Ponsonby Business Association and have informed them before we went to the local board of the proposal, and then have also been in communication with them since then regarding today. And we have provided assurance to them that we will continue that the open conversation with them as the project developed to be approved.
And certainly I'll just continue. The 43 spaces are the existing spaces that are being retained, and that was the rationale for retaining them, to be able to reduce the number of spaces on street.
Thank you. And Madam Chair, I mean, ideally, I would like to have seen it in the report that there's this understanding from Eke Panuku and Auckland Transport in terms of the future of the area and how this car park is an opportunity to really show that we're investing in parking, and that parking is going to be re-looked at in the future. And ideally, Madam Chair, it would be good that we could have then noted that in our decision making, so that everybody's aware of it going forward. But I appreciate it's not in the report, so I won't take that further.
Yeah.
But and I don't need to talk to this, but I am in support. But I just feel that that's kind of a missed opportunity to have not given that holistic picture around the future of parking, transport, active modes, the use of the corridor, and that this is the quid pro quo for this investment. So thank you. I'll leave it there, Madam Chair.
Do you want to move it, Councillor Koo?
Yes, I will move it. I will move it, and I won't try and interfere with what the recommendations are there.
Okay.
But I move it on with that. This is why I'm supporting it, because I just think I am showing a commitment to the needs of the businesses for parking, on the understanding that the corridor is going to be reprioritised in the future.
Right, got that. Do I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair. Collins.
Oh, Efesa Collins. Thank you, Councillor Collins. You're Panuku, aren't you? That's great. So we've got a mover and a seconder. Councillor Darby, you have a question.
Yes, thanks, Chair. And that was quite helpful. Thank you, Councillor Coombe, for giving a bit more background. I was thinking the same. I thought this was looking a little bit inconsistent with what we're doing in other areas. So can I just have a check? At what level at Auckland Transport, management and possibly governance, was the decision taken to retain this asset at all? Was consideration given? Was there some kind of options analysis of and consideration given to disposing of it outright and letting the market provide for the mobility needs of customers?
Yes, so it was considered as part of the service optimization opportunity to dispose it outright. But as working together with Panuku, we also just assessed the option of delivering the same number of car parks and achieving the outcomes that were beneficial for the community. Letitia, you could probably speak more on that assessment.
Thank you. Yes, when this first came through to Iki Panuku and Auckland Transport, it was following an approach by the adjoining owner, who's the developer who's interested in purchasing this land. We worked with Auckland Transport to ascertain if the property did need to be retained in whole or in part. That went through for approval to the Auckland Transport Board. We continued working over a period of, I'd say it was probably close to 2 years, with Auckland Transport while they confirmed final car parking requirements, did their various assessments. And on that basis, we are still proposing that the minimum number of car parks are retained. We are setting this up in such a way whereby we can, should in the future part or whole of the property not be needed for car parking, it will be structured in such a way that it could be disposed of, but that's not something that we're considering at the moment. Auckland Transport have informed us that there is an ongoing need for this car park and 43 car parks to be retained in this area, and that's the basis that we're working on.
Okay, that's very clear, Letitia. So that it did go to the AT board or a subcommittee where the decisions could be made, and the title that results from this could be offloaded at a future time, because there's absolutely no easements or constraints that would actually compromise the value. You're ensuring all of that. I see your head nodding affirmatively, and there is an assumption to ensure that at least the costs of operating, I think I saw 30,000, would be offset by paid parking in this location from day one that it opens. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Walker, question from you.
Sure. So I've got a question around the nature of the parking in respect of the development. Has consideration been given around providing parking for micromobility, for bikes, and in particular e-bikes, for charging for e-bikes, for car sharing, particularly car sharing on the part of electric vehicles, and charging for electric vehicles as part of the redevelopment of this site? Essentially, that goes to future-proofing the area so it fits with our transport strategies into the future, which will be a different form of parking to what they are now. And in that respect, using this site as an exemplar of what parking could be like and should be like. Thank you.
Yep, so certainly AT's parking design team have been working with Panuku and the developer on a concept plan which future-proofs for EV charging whether it's bikes or cars, and also thought has been put into future-proofing for that, the shared mobility for car share operations. So this design has been future-proofed for that.
And if I could just note, Madam Chair, that's also detailed in the report. So there's confirmation and that we are seeking to achieve those things.
So just a supplementary question, Madam Chair. So in respect of achieving those things, are we proposing to achieve those things at the outset? And by that I mean not sometime in the future, but now?
Letitia, or
If I may jump in, Adam Chair. So given that it hasn't been, given that we haven't actually had the approvals yet to commence with disposal, we haven't, been able to properly negotiate with the developers on their timeline and get an understanding for when all of this will sort of be finalised. But it is expected that if it is approved, then through those negotiations, and once we've got an understanding, we will then have a better idea of what the space will look like at the outset.
And as I mentioned earlier, Madam Chair, this has also been structured in such a way that there's flexibility, so it can change in the future if it needs to, as community needs and society may or may not change.
Yeah.
And just a question, Madam Chair. In respect of exercising these requirements, I haven't seen the contractual relationships that are proposed, but are we in Auckland Transport in a position where we can drive those things?
Through the Chair, yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. I believe that's the end of all the questions. Are there any comments? Look, I don't think there are, because they've kind of been made as by way of the questions for this particular item, and I think that's been particularly strong by Councillor Cooman, Darby and Walker. So to that end, it's been moved and seconded, and I will take it to the vote on voices. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to item 11, which is our council group and our council parent quarterly performance reports for the first 3 months of the year. It's quarter one, ending the 30th of September 2021. And to introduce this item is Karuna. I welcome you. Thank you. Just while you're talking, councillors might want to have a look. The chair's recommendations I put up are merely highlights from the report, and I'll cover them when you have finished, Karuna. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and kia ora, everyone. So yes, as has just been introduced, we'll present the first quarter report, which covers the period up until the 30th of September. So Ross is going to cover the group results. John will provide an update on the debt picture, and Nicola and I will take you through the AC parent financial and performance measure results. We also have a brief presentation from Jazz Singh and Taryn Crew, who are going to talk about some of the supply chain challenges. So Ross, I'll hand it over to you to kick off the group results. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karuna. We go to the next slide, please. The next one, yep. So the September quarter was a very interesting and unusual quarter, as I'm sure everyone's aware. The first quarter, so July and the first half of August, was a quarter of strong delivery. We had public transport going pretty strong prior to the most recent lockdown. We had construction going pretty well, lots of CapEx being delivered, lots of community events. So that's kind of the first half and the grey on the left there. But come mid-August, everything just kind of stopped. Construction stopped, public transport ground to a trickle, events were cancelled, and then we had some extreme weather events just to throw it in there to make life even more challenging. So I'm sure you're all aware of that. Everyone's lived through this. But what that means is you kind of look at the results for that September quarter. It is really a picture of two completely different halves. So what happened? In terms of CapEx delivery, no surprise, it was down. It was 68% delivery of capital investment compared to budget for the quarter as a whole. Strong in the first part of the quarter. Lots of stuff delivered, particularly great progress by Watercare, including with their Waikato plant. Going to be good progress with Ports of Auckland working on their container terminal systems, etc. So it started off with a hiss and a roar, it was a really good delivery, but then things ground to a halt, particularly with the level 4 lockdown, and as we know, lots of projects stopped, lots of delays. Central Intercept is one of the big ones that was impacted, obviously, but road renewals across the board, Matakana Driver Link had to stop. Transform Manukau was another project that was underway and about to get momentum going, and some of the smart work on the council buildings as part of the council, the corporate strategy buildings program, again ground to a halt. So within that, City Rail Link hasn't changed our financials, because what we do is we invest and put money into City Rail Link Limited, and so it's the slowdown within the City Rail Link Limited's books. So it didn't affect our investment for that quarter, but as we know, the project has slowed down, and we know that there will be pressures coming through in terms of timing and cost of that project in due course. But overall for that quarter, 68% delivered, 415 million for the group compared to the 640 we had planned. If we go to the next slide and look at operating performance, so what we saw here, a bit of a mixed result, but we did see obviously public transport revenue was down, and the first item on the agenda today, you've sort of covered that extensively in terms of the impacts there and the mitigations around it. But a big hit to public transport revenue in the quarter, community facilities and events, pools, leisure centres and the like. So all of that revenue stopped during the lockdown period. So those were all lower for the quarter. On the positive side, we did see positive upsides and a bit in regulatory revenue, but a large increase in Watercare's infrastructure growth charges. So as water connections have incurred, there was a whole lot more water connections than expected. And so overall, that outweighed the negative results in the quarter, and we finished slightly up, 16 million favourable for direct revenue across the group, but mainly because of a very strong IGC number. But underneath that, we have seen those transport and other revenues take a sizable hit. On the spend side, spend was down 30 million favourable across the group for the quarter. Love to say that was a result of efficiencies, but it wasn't. It was about doing less work, deferring maintenance, running fewer PT services, closing events, cancelling events, a whole lot of work programs and initiatives that just had to be put on hold. So activity slowed down, and we delivered less OPEX. So overall, the results are favourable. Revenue up a bit higher than budget and expenditure lower than budget, but it was not a great quarter for delivery, and we've seen those real hits to PT revenue and other revenues. If we go to the debt management, so I'll invite John Bishop to talk a bit about the debt management for the quarter.
Look, thanks, Ross, and good morning, everybody. So I'll have a chat about debt and the associated ratios that we look at. So first of all, net debt, a small increase there to 10.5 billion. So that's only a $145 million increase for the quarter. And that's, as Ross pointed out, is largely on the back of a lot of CapEx and OPEX having to be deferred. As far as debt to revenue ratio, that's increased to 275%. Now, bear in mind, that's a gross debt figure, and that represents the fact that we have raised a fair amount of debt in the first quarter, and that's largely due to the fact that we've got a lot of maturities early in the new year, and also the fact that we're holding a bit more cash on hand than we normally would just to deal with the uncertainties of COVID. We'd expect that ratio to increase further as we get into the half-year end, again because we've raised additional debt, but again it should reduce back to around the budget level by the end of the year, obviously subject to where we go with some of the impacts of COVID. The middle ratio there, the after capital deficit ratio, Now, you might recall that's the additional ratio introduced to our Treasury Management Policy earlier on this year. And this is the other ratio that Standard & Poor's look at closely to make sure we can retain the metrics to allow us to maintain the AA credit rating. Now, that ratio looks at our cash revenue and cash capital revenue and compares that to our cash operating expenditure and cash capital expenditure. Now, as long as that ratio of cash expenditure does not exceed the ratio of cash revenue by more than 20%, and that's over a 5-year average, 2 years looking back, 2 years looking forward, and the current year, that's consistent with a AA rating. So as you can see, we're at minus 13%, so inside our target of minus 20%. The last point to make is that both Standard & Poor's and Moody's have done their periodic review of our credit ratings over the last quarter, and I'm pleased to say they have reaffirmed our ratings at AA and AA2 for Moody's, and they both remain on stable outlook. So on that, I'll pass it back to Ross.
Okay, thanks, John. So the next slide looks at people across the group. Obviously, health, safety and wellbeing is a huge focus and lots of effort going on in that space, keeping people safe and making sure everyone could work from home as we transitioned into lockdown and working remotely. FTE movement's pretty stable across the group, not a lot of significant change. Of the numbers, the biggest movement was water care up a bit higher. So a lot of that was just really project work. So to deliver some of their projects and asset management plans, and to support the Three Waters project, like a bit of gearing up to get ready for the transition, and some people seconded to other people, other organisations working on this, and a bit of backfill. So the Three Waters, at an operational level, there's a truckload of work to be done. And so water care is just resourced up to deal with that, and ports a little bit of extra work, a bit of extra FTE, but extra staff resource to deal with the small increase in volumes. The rest was reasonably minor. We go to the next slide. Just looking ahead. So what we've started to see in this quarter was some of the impacts of labour shortages, supply chain issues, inflation, rising interest rates. So in this quarter's results, these things have started to have an impact. They will affect further for the coming quarter, and of course these are the key things that have got us concerned as we work through the annual budget process, and that's been a big focus over the last month or so, and in the decisions you made yesterday around the annual budget items of consultation. These are the challenges we've had to deal with. We'll have Jazz Singh from the procurement team and Taryn Crew talk a bit later on about what they're seeing on the ground, particularly in terms of the supply chain issues and what that's likely to mean for us. It's one thing to look at inflation projections at a national level. It's another thing to what does it mean for our contracts and our projects on the ground. At the moment, it's just we're keeping an eye on these things. We're trying to assess the impacts, and we're really looking to see what does this mean for next year and beyond, when these will start to become real challenges for us. And then I'll pass across to Nicola to talk about the council parent.
Thanks, Ross. Kia ora, everybody. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, very similar themes for the parent as Ross has outlined for the group. We had 62% of the capital program delivered in the first quarter. Obviously, with the work, very little work happening in level 4. You can see there some of the projects that have been delayed. But I'd like to highlight one project that was completed during lockdown. Next slide, please. And that was the East Coast Bays Library. So this reopened in August, just prior to the lockdown. There was an extensive renewal. You can see some pretty amazing photos there of how it looks. I know it's a bit hard to imagine, but we actually had a gala day for families and tours of the library and a blessing as well. So I think that was great. This is one of Auckland's busiest libraries, and the project was delivered on time and within budget. So just to go now to the operating performance. Overall, the financial results are looking favourable. that's pleasing, but it certainly doesn't tell the full story of what's been happening in the quarter. So we definitely have had revenue drops in many parts of the operations, because obviously our facilities have been closed. So the revenue we'd normally get from pools, leisure centres, refuse transfer stations, a little bit in libraries, etc., we did not have for half of the quarter. But the construction sector kept booming, and our consenting volumes are still higher than what we had budgeted. So overall, our revenue is favourable. And on the expenditure side, interestingly, I guess in level 3 and 4 lockdowns, we do tend to save on operating costs because of our facilities and corporate offices being closed. So it looks more favourable. And then as we move into level 2, or as we now have the red traffic light setting, that's where we tend to have quite unfavourable cost impacts. We have all our normal operating costs going up, but we have reduced visitation and lower revenue. So that's what's happening in terms of operating performance. Our savings, we achieved 16.3 million in the quarter, so we're at 71% of the 90 million target for the current financial year. Just wanted to clarify that we're not counting any of those cost reductions that I talked about as a result of happening from the lockdowns. We're not counting them here towards the savings target, because they need to be used to offset the revenue losses that we also didn't budget. Some of the savings we achieved in the quarter, we had some good activity from our procurement team through contract negotiations. They've managed to negotiate favourable terms for catering supplies, bulk printing, and some postal costs for the electoral contract. We also saved on some utilities bills in the period that we still had water restrictions in place. And another cost reduction we have had ongoing was from the launch of My Auckland Dog, which is the online dog registration portal where you can update details of dog ownership, etc., and re-register your dog. That's really reduced a lot of the administrative work, and we've been able to pass those savings through. Actually, for those of you who were on the meeting yesterday, you would have seen the proposal to reduce some of the fees for dog registration. So that is a great achievement, I think. So while the progress in the first quarter has been good, we do face some headwinds. As Ross just mentioned, we have inflation, and particularly around staff costs. A lot of pressures there. It's also been very challenging to find permanent ongoing cost reductions. So we have around 52 million that is achieved towards the following financial year targets of 90 million. So that's something that we still are keeping an eye on and needing to really work hard to think about how we will achieve the 90 million target next year. I will hand to Karuna, who's going to talk about the non-financial performance measures.
Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Nicola. So this quarter we had 23 performance measures that were updated, as can be seen on the slide. There was a similar amount of performance measures where targets were met versus those that were not met. For those that weren't met, COVID-19 did play obviously a large part, and these related mainly to community services and facilities, and where events had been cancelled. Some regulatory measures were impacted also, given our inability to visit food premises or high-risk alcohol premises over the lockdown, and there are plans in place to address the backlog. Also in the regulatory area, statutory processing timeframes did decline. However, customer satisfaction remained fairly stable, with a slight increase for building consents and dropped only slightly for resource consents. And however, with the considerable regulatory volumes, there is likely to be some impact to customer satisfaction in the future. It's also worth noting that the stormwater management area achieved all 5 targets despite the heavy rain and flooding that occurred in August. If we move over to the next slide. Thank you, Kalinda. Customer satisfaction results were particularly strong in our digital and customer services space. I guess anecdotally, customers are happy with the helpful and knowledgeable customer service team and for proactively actioning their requests. We also had an improved customer effort score, and this related to an acknowledgement that the processing of requests for service and information has required less effort on their part. So that was pretty good news. And we had our extraordinary COVID-19 response landed us an award at the 2021 Local Government New Zealand Excellence Awards. And also noting, of course, that as of 1st of September, Auckland libraries no longer charge overdue fines for any items, regardless of format. In terms of challenging and things we're keeping an eye on, in relation to the note on illegal dumping, staff have noticed that there is an increase in the dumping of mulch and asbestos. So an illegal dumping campaign will be rolled out over the next few months to help counteract this. And of course, as mentioned by Ross and Nicola earlier, the recruitment challenges and labour market shortage remain an area of concern, with competition for some skills driving an upward trend in staff turnover for certain roles, and a number of positions do remain open. So on that note, I would like to introduce Jazz Singh and Taryn Crew to speak briefly about the material labour costs and the procurement strategy. Jazz and Taryn, over to you.
Thanks, Karina, and kia ora koutou. Through you, Madam Chair, just Taryn and I would like to take the opportunity to talk about a little bit of future focus, particularly around council parent and our CapEx program, but equally some of the discussion today also applies across our operational costs as well. As Ross and Nicola and others have mentioned, there are headwinds when we look forward in terms of supply chain, but also at the supply market constraints that are happening in New Zealand at the moment. This chart here on screen is based in US dollars, and it is an international bit of research, but a lot of our commodities are sourced internationally. And it's just showing you in the last 12 months some of the increases that we are seeing across certain commodity categories. But if I go to the next slide, this is probably the more interesting one in terms of volatility. So one of the things that you can see in the graph is that after periods of uncertainty, like we had through GFC and the initial COVID, actually some of these prices and costs do actually go down. And so we're coming off a relatively low base from end of 2019 and 20. So you're seeing some of those large increases, but the forecasts are, particularly in the non-residential building category, which is where we play, we're not in the residential category, that these will taper off eventually as some of those supply chain constraints, shipping constraints ease, and in particular around labour costs as well, if we have more movement of labour into the country. In terms of the labour market projections, you can see that they do look quite high going out 2 to 3 years. This will all depend on, the effects of ongoing COVID-based restrictions on immigration, etc. as well, and the very low levels of unemployment currently in the industry. It is becoming hard to source that labour. That will flow through into impacts with our suppliers as well, and eventually flow through into the costs that we are seeing associated with the contracts. I want to be clear that this is not all alarmist, in that the input costs around materials and labour costs are only part of the total costs associated with our contracts. So we're not seeing massive price escalations at the moment. Generally in line with what we're seeing around CPI overall, but we are seeing specific areas where there are some challenges coming forward. So I might invite Taryn to talk about some of the challenges, particularly in the community facilities space that we're seeing.
We could probably move to the next slide. Kia ora koutou.
So as Jazz mentioned, community facilities is of course only one of the capital delivery areas for the council group, but given our portfolio is quite diverse in the types of projects that we deliver, we just thought it'd be quite beneficial just to talk through some of the mitigations that we're putting in place to reduce the risk of that market volatility and any of those expected increases. As Jazz mentioned, really important that we understand that it is a little bit up and down. We are seeing some contracts through tenders come through with higher costs than what we're expecting, but in the same vein, we are seeing some that are coming underneath our engineers' estimates or well within the estimates that we had. So it's not broad brush total increase that we're seeing at this point. Some of the mitigations that we're doing across the community facilities program and the community portfolio is just through the procurement process. We are working a lot closer around that the program management with our suppliers and contractors. We engaging quite early with them to identify the types of materials that we need, and through the design processes as well, you know, really focusing in on resource availability rather than just that costing element, and making sure that we've done, well, the suppliers and the contractors have done enough work to be able to know what they can secure materials at and lock in some contracts in that way. Most of our contracts that we lock in are secure price contracts, and they don't have escalation clauses. Now, that doesn't mean that if something went completely out of whack that we could, you know, see that cost escalation and them asking us for claims, but generally we're quite protected in that way. The other area was in our bundling of projects. So what we've been doing as well is looking at how we can bundle like projects, go out for tender with a number that might be over a period of time. That gives the suppliers and contractors a little bit more certainty around being able to, a number of them early procure some of the materials, and we'll keep it in their yards, even if we know the project's only kicking off in a couple of months' time. And then just in terms of, I suppose, our forward looking as we're working through our work programs for next year's annual plan, just some encouragement around, you know, making sure that we are including enough contingency in those estimates as we're developing the work programs, so that we know that we can honour what we're putting into the work programs and deliver within that budget. And continuing to give local boards there's a monthly update that goes to them on any of the capital program risks or delays that we're seeing in any of those projects. So I think in all, as Jazz mentioned, it's not major for us at this point, but we are very conscious of what we're seeing happen out in the market. And I think just through continued tight program management, working closely with procurement on any other type of mechanisms we can do to help secure some of those prices, and working closely with the suppliers and contractors is what we'll.
So I'll start with Councillor Walker.
Sure. So thank you very much, Madam Chair. So I have a question around the revenue side of council's operation. The context is that I understand the fixation around costs, but my particular concern is around what we are doing in marketing to boost the revenues. And the context around my question goes like this. We exist in a monopoly situation across many of our deliverables that generate revenue. I'm referring to public transport, libraries, many of our event spaces and the like. In a business situation, for example, a $5,000 spend on marketing might generate a $50,000 return in revenue. In our instance, it's probably much better than that because of our monopoly situation and because of the sensitivity to information. So my question is our marketing department, if we have a marketing department addressing this issue, can we have some information on ratios, particularly our marketing to revenue ratio across parts of our organisation, so that we know what we could achieve in increasing revenue across parts of our operation? And this is against a background contextually where it would also be useful to have some information around our fixed and variable cost ratios relative to our revenue. And that means that you can generate break-even analysis, but also generate information around the marketing to revenue ratio. So that's my question, Madam Chair. Are we doing that work? Can we have it presented to us? If not, my question is, how soon can parts of our organisation transition to that perspective? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And just before staff answer, I will note that this is a financial quarterly report for the time that has happened, and you're asking for something to look forward. So maybe it might come to you separately, but I'll invite relevant staff person to answer that. And is that you, Claudia?
I think my particular question, Madam Chair, is around reporting in more detail on the revenue side rather than the cost side. And I'm not knocking costs, but it's revenue where we've got the highest propensity to make a difference.
Thank you. Nicola, do you want to go first or Claudia? Nicola?
Yeah, if I could just make an initial comment, and then I would like to hand to Claudia. So just to note that the substantial majority of the revenue for the parent relates to our regulatory compliance activities and consenting activities, which is obviously not something it would necessarily be appropriate to market for. But obviously there are other activities in the community services area in particular, which is where I'll hand over to Claudia to talk to.
So kia ora koutou katoa. I hope you can hear me today. I've got some funny headsets so that I can hear these calls without all the outside noise. So thank you very much for the question, Councillor Walker. It's a very good question, and it's certainly something that we're thinking about very carefully. So the challenge that we've had is in the last quarter, we were obviously restricted in the services that we could provide, and we could not restart those services until we had a clear understanding of when the government COVID protection framework would start. As soon as that started, we then worked overtime to try to make sure that we could open our services effectively, safely, and well. And where we could, we then immediately started direct marketing campaigns to our customers. So, for example, we are working with, we send messages to our active recreation customers for pools and leisure. We remind them that the services are open, and we use that opportunity to reignite their customership. We also did that during lockdown through other ways, but of course that was a little bit limited. So we would maintain customer relationships by providing online classes or through regular connections with them. For the event services, it's a little bit more challenging because we can't or haven't been able to open events and restart these quickly. We've been maintaining our relationships with our customers in the event space over this period because it's a very good way to make sure that they can return to our services. We've also been working, or we're starting to work, with Auckland Unlimited on the Thank You Tamaki Makaurau campaign, which will enable us to help activate town centres and Tamaki Makaurau, but also will use potentially our facilities and be potentially providing additional revenue to us. So there are a number of very, very active steps we are taking. We are working closely with our communications and marketing team. We have a marketing expert who is on our lead team and who works very closely with us. And we're working, and she is helping us with the Summer Sorted campaign too. So there are a lot of activities underway, and we can perhaps provide further update at another occasion should that be wanted. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. Next question, Councillor Dalton.
Thank you. It's a question regarding the water care increase in staff for Three Waters, or to gear up for Three Waters. My question is, can somebody tell me if they are funding that out of their existing budgets, or are they getting, or are they getting the no worse off funding or the better off funding to fund that? Please.
through you, Chair, I can have a go at that, Ross, if you like. It's Pramod here. So my understanding is that there's a combination of reasons why FTEs for water care have gone up. That is one reason. The other is obviously the increased investment in capital through the recovery budget. These roles have been budgeted in water care's budgets and funded through their revenues. So my understanding is it's not funded by any additional revenue from government.
Pramod, do you know if water care is getting any of the allocation of the no worse off funding or the better off funding? It's specifically around Three Waters, so I just want to get some clarity on how we decide to spend that, because I did have an assumption that it would go to water care so they could gear up and be ready for the transition.
If I can interrupt, Angela, my understanding is that the better off packages for the councils, not for the existing water entities.
Okay, so the existing water entities would need to fund within the budgets they have to gear up.
I think that's the case. There may be other sources of fundings rather outside of the better off package, but when I looked at the heads of agreement on the better off package, it was clearly directed as going towards councils for a particular political purpose, I suppose. At that time, it was a sweetener before it was mandated, but they're not resiling from the fact that they'll continue to pay that. But I think that they will want to work with Watercare to make sure that, because Watercare will be for them the model of what the future entities will look like. So I think that they will rely very heavily on Watercare because Watercare is the model and is the best performing water entity in the country. So I think government will look at how they can facilitate Watercare having that wider role to help them with other water service entities as they start them from scratch around the country. But this is perhaps supposition on my part, but I that's what I would expect to see. Hopefully that's a little bit helpful.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you.
No, that's good. I think we were looking for an answer, so that's great for that clarity. Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Filipaina.
Tēnā koe, Chair, and tēnā koutou katoa to our staff. Look, Nicola, I want to go to slide 13, which is the $90 million savings target. Now, can you please tell me what happens if we don't achieve it? I know you've got the outlook in there, but if we don't achieve it for 22 or even 23, 24, what is the roll-on effect in regards to that, please?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Filipaina. I would actually like to defer it to Ross Tucker, because I think the answer is more of then what happens to the big picture in terms of the impact on the group finances.
Copy.
Yeah, so I guess that if we can't achieve the existing savings targets that are there, that will create more pressure on the group operating budgets. If we kind of know about that and build it into our budgets, it means when we set the budgets, we'll have to find other ways to address that gap. Maybe look to reduce services or defer capex. If it's within a year, or if we can't find anything else, then the only remaining lever becomes debt, and we have to carry more debt. And to the extent that we don't achieve savings, we carry more debt, and that's not a sustainable place to be. So we need to try to achieve those as much as possible, or if it looks like we can't, we'll need to find other mitigations, and it's going to make all of the pressures that we're facing that much harder.
By supplementary, please, Chair. So, Ross, in regards to what you've just said, and we obviously put the pressure on ourselves in regards to the $90 million savings. If it is not met year in, year out, so for say the next upcoming 23, 24 years, does that mean that obviously there'll be even more harder decisions to make around projects not going ahead?
That's right, or you need to find some other funding lever. So, for example, at the moment we've identified $50 million out of next year's the next financial year's target, and I think it's the subsequent year. So that leaves a $40 million gap. one lever would be to look at general rates, and a 40 million gap is would be the equivalent of 2% of rates. So it means reducing services or the rates lever or other solutions to deal with a 2% rates impact. So it starts to get pretty significant. I guess at the moment, we're not saying we need to do that. We're at the moment, we're saying we're making every effort to achieve that 90. We are saying that it can't all be efficiencies that they're harder to find, and some of the achieving the 90 might have service impacts, and that is part of the work program that we've got on the table at the moment.
Thank you, Chair. Got two more part-time, and then that's it, and it relates to this. So Ross, again, it's a hypothetical question, but does the governing body, and I may be sort of moving between the fine line around a political answer, but the ability to reduce the $90 million savings, especially if we cannot meet it in the next, say, or even in 23, 24, is that ability that may well be for your worship, the mayor, to then reduce that, so then we don't get into a situation where we end up putting a lot of the projects that our community have seen getting put into the long-term plan. Is that a decision? Oh yeah, that may be the political decision. Your worship, have you got any comments in regards to that, of if we don't meet 23 and 24, that there's an ability for the governing body to reduce 90 million as a result of COVID or any other issue?
Well, I don't know where he is, but I'm happy to step in. So this is for this year, all right? We have set it for next year. And of course, what I will say is that we have an annual plan process, and part of that annual plan process is to look at the budget on an ongoing basis. I would say to any councillor considering putting their hand up to come back for the next term, that financially there are going to have to be some really tough decisions, because you think this term's been tough, but actually it gets tougher and tougher as the low-hanging fruit get absorbed, or as the low-hanging fruit get dealt with, the little stuff, you find, the triangle gets smaller and smaller to actually deal with some savings targets. So what I'm hearing staff say, and from what my knowledge of everything is that we will probably be okay for this year. We know what our planning is for the annual budget. We haven't, for 22-23, we haven't signed that off yet. Remember, it hasn't even gone out for consultation. So I'm getting, I won't say confidence, but I'm hearing that we will be okay for this financial year, and I think that's the next financial year that we're planning for. We have to look at that, but at the moment, it looks like we will probably scrape in 21, 22, 22, 23.
Yeah, I've heard the same as well, Chair, and this is why I'm asking my party around that, and it may well come back to us making a political decision. But my last question is I think a little bit pedantic, but I just love the figures. Is in the chart where you've got 90 million savings target, the figures in that sort of bubble glass, shouldn't they add up to 90 million, or is it a rounding off mistake?
Appreciate your sharp eyes, Councillor Filipina. That is indeed a rounding, and you've picked up a mistake there. Thank you.
No, I didn't want to do that. Whether it was a rounding exercise that financial people do. That's all. Sorry. Thank you, Chair.
Well done, Councillor. Next question I have is from Councillor Coombe, and then from Councillor Hills.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora koutou, and thank you to everybody doing significant work in this space. I appreciate, Madam Chair, what you've said, that this is a report on a performance report looking back, but my partai is around the presentation we received. So can I still ask a question just on the presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. And just in particular, looking at the procurement options and the recommendations in that slide, and I just would like to get some reassurance around the reevaluation that's underway of all our CapEx projects. And I did ask this question of Auckland Transport, but is a reevaluation happening to ensure that all of our CapEx projects are aligned with Te Taruki a Tawhiri and our new priorities that are captured in there, and in particular our emissions reduction targets, and being looked at through that lens also in terms of how it can, it will have the added benefit of potentially reducing costs if projects can be rescoped or downsized through that evaluation process. So I just want some reassurance that that's happening right across the council whānau.
Karen?
Good.
Karen, is it you?
Yeah, well, I can talk for community facilities. I can't talk for the rest of the council. Someone else might need to jump in. But yes, to answer your question, Councillor Coombs, it is something that we're looking at. Where we've got the most place to manoeuvre is really where we're still in the design of some of our projects, or that early design, or still in that procurement stage. So there is a much stronger lens with climate impact and emissions, and also, as you've mentioned, that ongoing cost. And it's not to do with procurement, but we've also got a bit of funding which came back into the budget as part of the LTP, which is sustainability funding. So we've been looking at things like, existing assets, pool covers, for instance, where we can reduce heat loss in our pools, more use of LED lights in our sports fields, etc. So really targeting those areas of high use. But as we said, as part of that early design of projects, definitely looking at more of that whole of life costing to look at what the best option is going forward.
Kia ora, thank you, Taryn. Appreciate that. I know I've kind of asked that question a few times in different forum, so I do appreciate that. And Madam Chair, just may I, do we still have Madam Chair? Your photo, can't see you anymore. Oh, yeah. You've gone all blank for me, like a black box. There you are. It's just nice to be able to see you, to be able to talk to you. Do appreciate it, and seeing Councillor Dalton's smiley face too. Could I just use this opportunity this is quite a very niche question, but it is on what's being reported to us, and this is sort of just a request through you that when we get the next quarterly report, could we ask of regulatory that they include details of the number of applications through the fast track process for outside dining, so we can just see the impact of that and the decision to waive the fees and put in place that fast track, and it will be particularly relevant to the next quarter. Is that something we can just signal that we would like for next time?
I'm sure that would be possible. Councillor Cooper, you're hearing that, aren't you? Yeah, as well. Yes. Yep. All good.
Thank you. Thank you, ngā mihi.
Thank you, Tanakwe. Councillor Hills.
Kia ora, Chair, thank you, and thanks to the staff team. I know this has been a really difficult time again, and I know this doesn't show the full impact of what's happened in the last few months because it's only up until the end of September, but is there anyone that could update me just on staff levels? Because staff levels as a family looks pretty steady, but we know there has been reductions over time, or are we, or does this not tell the full story because we've actually reduced our contractor and casuals quite considerably and have put more of that in-house? Is there a better way that I could see that sort of picture? I know it's hard when you've got ports and CCOs as well as the council parent, but
so you wanted to break down the council.
I just, if anyone has the figures off the top of their head, just how it works, because I know we have reduced numbers, but we've also reduced contractors, which means we're spending more in-house, but it just doesn't, maybe it's for a yearly report as opposed to a quarter, but if anyone could kind of explain that.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Hills. I don't have the figures to hand, but we certainly do have the information internally, so I can have a look at it for you. Our staff numbers for the parent have been, despite quite significant efforts to recruit, have been difficult to shift. In the last couple of months, we have managed to increase staff numbers, and we're at that time of the year where we're having interns and graduates starting to join us, as well as seasonal workers to operate the facilities that are open over summer. But I'm not sure on the contractor numbers, but I can have a look at it and get back to you.
Is that all right? She can send you an email.
Yeah, maybe it'll be good to maybe. It would, yeah, it might need to, maybe I'm asking more of a year since the emergency budget as well, just those changes, how that's kind of panned out. The other question, just quickly, Madam Chair, and I know it's COVID lockdowns that have been the biggest, and supply issues that have been the biggest issue for our capital, but I just worry a little bit about the future inflation pressures, but also the debt to revenue. Is there any discussion of how we can front load any more of the capital to prevent that future cost increase, so we have a bit of a skip up on the debt to revenue, but it pans out because the interest rates and stuff are cheaper, or that's just not how it's going to work right now? I'm just wondering if we leave things longer, if they become, $100-200 million more expensive, is that, are we working out which is the cheapest way or most cost effective way to do that capital?
I'm sure we are, but I'll ask Ross for comment on that.
Yep. So we're looking across the group. We're looking at the capital program, between now and February, March, as we pull together information to support the final budget. I guess you've got pressures in terms of rising capital costs, but you've also got the supply chain issues, and can you get the work done early? So the aim, as set out in the meal proposal that was agreed yesterday, was to try to keep the envelopes the same over the next few years. And so that might mean with rising costs, we've got to do a little bit less, less projects delivered, but keep the funding the same. I guess that would keep us within our debt to revenue parameters. Well, what you're talking about, I guess, is going faster, investing more now on the basis that the costs will rise. I guess that's something that people will be looking at, those kind of trade-offs. Probably the big constraint, and maybe Jazz wants to comment, but is if we wanted to get a whole lot more work done, can you get the materials? Can you get the labour? How feasible would it even be to do that strategy? So I don't know whether Jazz or someone wants to comment on those side of things, but people are thinking about those parameters, trade-offs as we speak.
Absolutely, and through the chair, we are working on those projects that are ready to go or more developed. Those are the ones that we're looking to push along quickly, go to the market, make sure that suppliers in the market know what we're trying to do. So more we can give them certainty that we are going to do it, the more chance we'll get them to bid and get better prices. The more uncertain we are about doing it, if this is still in the concept phase, then it becomes really hard. And so we'll try and rephase those projects so that we can do the certain ones quicker and the more uncertain ones a bit later.
Okay, thank you for that answer. Look, that's the last of the questions or the part I. I'm going to move the recommendations, and if anyone cannot read my B, C, D or E, they're just highlights from the report. I'm happy to read them out, but they're highlights.
Second, Madam Chair.
Right, thank you, Councillor Cooper. So it's been moved and seconded, Simpson and Cooper. I'll just check that everyone's okay with the 4 recommendations. Sounds like it, so I will take it to the vote on voices. All those in favour say aye.
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 Oh, no, I won't. I'm asked for comments, aren't I?
Chair, can I look, you've already put it, so I have no problems now in removing the comment I want to make. I will make those now directly to our staff, so I'll leave it and it'll save you bringing it back into it, so you've already passed it. So I will remove my whakaaro. Kia ora.
Thank you. And Councillor Cooper, I sincerely apologise.
Fine not to comment. Okay, I just wanted to comment on staffing going forward. but that's
well,
okay.
Well, we're looking at backwards, so that way that's all good.
No problem.
And I will just say a huge thanks to the staff for this. That it's been a really tough quarter, and it's going to be a tough year, as we all know. So it's been moved, seconded, and voted on. And anyone against? Well, then it's been moved unanimously. Thank you. On that note, I think I better have a 5-minute break. So it may be a 10-minute break. We'll see you 12:20. Thank you. I'll try and get through everything before DC's before lunch. So I'll see you at 12:20. Quick break now, and we'll continue on and have lunch before the DC policy. Thank you.
Madam Chair, sorry I got cut off, but it sounded like a great answer, and thank you. Sorry about that.
All good, Richard.
Sandra, can you just confirm that I'll be moving item 12 and Kathy's will second it?
Yep.
Thank you, Alf. We have.
Yeah, I've got that, Alfie.
Oh, sorry. I just thought I'd ask while we're having the break. Kia ora.
Alan to present this paper.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tamara, would you like to briefly speak to the background, please?
The background, yes, certainly. Auckland Council and Tamaki Regeneration Limited entered into agreement for land exchange, and the purpose of that agreement is to help Tamaki Regeneration to develop for housing purposes area around Tamaki. And part of Taniwha Reserve was identified as suitable for land exchange with TRL's land. And in this particular case, it's around 2,779 square meters of Taniwha Reserve that we want to dispose of. And we will receive approximately 10,000 square meters of TRL's land. This proposal for land exchange has been supported by the local board, also by Mana Whenua and Parks, Arts, Community and Events Committee. Alan, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Tamara. Only that in the scheme of the Tamaki regeneration plan for intensification in the area, this is one of several exchanges that will occur, and it results in us receiving far more open space for the residents or future residents, and in this particular case opens the whole reserve up. It has a range of safety and amenity improvements and outcomes for us, and fully support it.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Alan. Thanks, Tamara. It has been moved by Councillor Filipaina and seconded by Councillor Casey, who I'm hoping will accept my chair's recommendation, just noting the net gain of open space to Auckland Council being approximately 6,393 square metres. And we also need to note, Sandra, that Councillor Bartley has declared a perceived or potential conflict of interest that can be noted for this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. So we'll go to questions. There shouldn't be, because we have discussed this in the PACE committee, but are there, I will, for process clarity, call for any questions. There being none, I'll call for comments. There being none, I will invite Councillor Filipaina for closing remarks.
Kia ora, Chair. I just really wanted to acknowledge the staff as we did when it came to the PACE. And in particular, obviously, Tamara, Alan and Meredith as well, because there was a lot of work done behind the scenes. So Alan, to you, especially around those with Mr. O'Meara, and also to Meredith, our legal counsel. Just want to say thank you so much, and the team at PACE and also the local board, want to acknowledge them. And Chair, my last comment is the fact that on the 22nd of November, as a result of the work being done by Alan and Meredith, I sent an email to Mr. O'Meara to close the loop in regards to the item that came to the PACE committee. And around that process, Chair, sorry, this is the last part, Julie McKee from our regulatory team and hearings team, and getting us through that. So Chair, it was just so cool in regards to getting this done. So thank you. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thank you, Councillor Filipaina. So it's been moved and seconded, and I will now take it to the vote on voices. All those in favour say aye.
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 Against? Carried unanimously. Thank you. We move now to item 13, which is a summary of the Finance Performance Committee information and information memoranda and briefings for the Forward Work Programme. I'm happy to move. The Deputy Chair is happy to second, I believe. Is that correct, Councillor Henderson?
Sure am, Chair.
Thank you. Do you want to present this or we take it as read? Ross?
Madam Chair, it should be taken as read.
Taken as read, right.
Report,
yeah.
as is the next one.
Right, so I'll just move. It's been moved and seconded. I'll take it to the vote then. Oh, sorry, any questions? Nope. So any comments? Nope. So I'll take it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you, unanimously. Summary of confidential decisions and related information released into open. This is, of course, the documents that have been around our workshops, our nearly 30 hours of workshops on the annual budget.
I'll move.
So Kathy's happy to move. I will second. It's about 1,000 pages of information. I'm sure someone will read it. We all have. So it's been moved and seconded. Any questions or comments? There being none, I'll take it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. People, I think what I'll do, I've been talking to staff in that quick break. I think what I'll do is we'll take a break now for lunch because the DC policy may well take quite a while. So we will take a half-hour break and maybe just come back at 1 o'clock.
We come back into the confidential invitation though?
No, we're not in confidential. We're still in open.
Okay, fine.
All right, DCs are in open. It's item 15 and we will come back at 1 p.m. Thank you very much. Have a nice lunch. See you later. Yes, Andrew, I noticed. Committee members, so welcome back. Bethard and my Magnus, you won't be hangry now, you've had a nice lunch break. So I will call for Sandra, as is the usual policy, to take the role. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor Goff.
Kia ora.
Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Kia ora.
Oh, hi, how are you going? Can you come and see me?
Councillor Bartley, somebody is unmuted.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant.
Chris Fletcher, you're on. Sorry.
Oh, apologies.
Sorry, I was trying to jump down there.
Hello, just dialing in.
IMSB member Blair. Councillor Casey.
Kia ora, Sandra.
Thank you. Councillor Collins.
Kia ora, Sandra.
Thank you. Councillor Combe. Councillor Combe. Councillor Cooper. Councillor Dalton.
Kia ora.
Councillor Darby. Councillor Filipina.
Talofa, Sandra.
Councillor Fletcher.
Hi, Sandra.
Okay. Councillor Henderson.
Kia ora.
Councillor Hills. Councillor Mulholland. Councillor Newman.
Afternoon.
Okay. Councillor Sayers.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Stewart.
Connected.
Okay. Councillor Walker.
Only just.
Councillor Watson.
Present.
IMSB Chair Taipari.
Kia ora.
Councillor Young.
Present.
Thank you. And can we just check Councillor Darby, Coombe and Hills and Mulholland are not present?
I'm
present. Oh, thank
Darby
you.
might still be at Auckland Transport.
Auckland Transport, yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Right, committee members, we now go to item 15, and that is the Contributions Policy 2021. And the purpose of today is to consider feedback on our draft Contributions Policy and to assess options for modifications to the proposal and adopt a final policy for 22. And I would invite Mr. Duncan to address the item. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Our report is recommending you adopt the policy, Contributions Policy 2022 today, with some amendments to the proposed changes that were put out for consultation. So this is one of Council's key revenue policies, and it provides for the recovery from developers of the share of the cost of infrastructure investments that they benefit from or cause the need for, that the Council has committed to make over the next decade. So we adopted a policy for consultation in September and undertook consultation in September and October. And the Finance and Performance Committee heard directly from from submitters in October. There were a number of key changes put out for consultation. We needed to update the policy to reflect the capital expenditure decisions in the 10-year budget. We were also recommending that the Council, for the first time, look beyond the next decade in terms of the investments in infrastructure that were going to be needed to meet the accelerating pace of growth in Auckland. And we were recommending that we add projects required to meet the cumulative impacts of growth beyond 2031. So these investments that we would need to make beyond 2031, and including some we would have liked to have made in this decade, but financing constraints prohibited us from doing so, adding them to the investment priority areas identified in the 10-year budget, like Mount Roskill and Tamaki, but in particular Drury, and we were proposing to begin with Drury in this policy. The other key changes that we consulted on was to bring forward the time at which developers who have to pay their DCs at building consent were required to pay those. And that would have required them to pay them 6 to 24 months earlier than under the current policy. And we also were proposing a change to our policy to meet our new legislative obligations to support the development of Māori land. So you had the feedback from the public, and we presented that to you in November. And we've also now got the feedback from the local boards, and both the feedbacks are covered in attachments to the report you have today. There was strong support for the proposed changes from the public and from local boards. The key theme was they supported developers paying DCs, and in particular to reduce the current and future burden on ratepayers. However, the developers weren't in support of the key changes. In particular, they were concerned about the impact of the large price increases in Drury, and they sought more information to support that and to support them engaging with the Council on that proposal. They're also concerned that it would impact on house prices, and were concerned about the impact that requiring DCs to be paid earlier when they were due at building consent would impact on their ability to finance developments. Our officers have carefully considered the feedback from consultation, developers and from local boards, and we're recommending that the policy be adopted to reflect the updates in the 10-year budget and the changes proposed to meet our obligations to support the development of Māori land and the range of other small changes that we recommended. We're also recommending that the Council take a longer-term view of the infrastructure challenge and commit to adding projects beyond 2031 to our DC policy for the investment priority areas, and to carry that work out over the next 15 months. This is key to ensuring that early developers pay a fair share of the future investment they benefit from and cause the need for, and to reduce the prospect of elected members facing challenges in the future as to how that required investment will be funded, because it will otherwise have to come from rates or be confronted with investment and infrastructure shortfalls. However, we recognise that to ensure good decision making and to support developers providing feedback to support that decision making, that we take a bit more time with Drury and produce the information to support the proposals for additional infrastructure investment to be added to the DC policy in that area, produce more detailed information to support decision making on that and to support developers providing feedback and to respond to the request we've had from them and industry groups for more detailed information. So we're proposing that decisions on Drury now be made in June 2022. In addition, we are recommending that the current payment timing for development contributions that have to be paid at building consent be retained because of the financing challenges that it may present for some developers. Thank you, and we are happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you very much, Andrew, for that detailed presentation. My first part or question comes in the name of Councillor Cooper. Councillor, I think you might still be on mute.
Yes, I know that. I was just trying the spacebar option and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Thank you, Madam Chair. The question was, Andrew, through you, Madam Chair, was now that Drury goes to the bottom of the list, Northwest and other areas come to the top, starting at the end of next year. I just wondered, given that in the report it talks about the fact that Northwest already has a significant amount of housing, and there's a lot of people already benefiting from investment like Te Manawa and a lot of roading. Do you know, I couldn't find what sort of feedback we've had from the developers up there? I mean, Hugh Green he's Hugh Green doing up there too, but he talked about down south, or they.
So Drury, decisions on Drury would be in June 2022. Decisions on the inner Northwest would probably be heading towards March next year. We have had feedback, a broad range of feedback from the development community about the proposal to add projects beyond the 10 years. They were concerned about this for a variety of reasons, and that included, it was a particular focus in the feedback around Drury about the depth of information we'd provided, about the impact on house prices. Just to clarify, it's March 2023, not 2022.
Or Westgate, sorry, just the report talked about coming through at the end of, I think December 22 it said, but maybe that's...
Yeah, it's March 2023 is the time frame for the inner Northwest.
Oh, thank you. So that was, yeah.
Sorry, I keep thinking next financial year rather than next calendar year. Apologies.
Okay, no, that I understand. Thank you.
So the developers were concerned about uncertainties when we look so far ahead. Our response to that will be it's the council's obligation to look so far ahead because of the nature of the infrastructure and services we provide to the community. So we need to ask ourselves questions about how we're going to plan for that and then finance and fund it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the consideration of all this complexity in here, because I can understand the public's wanting developers to pay 100%, and I can understand developers loath to do so. So somewhere we've got to find some accuracy in the middle, and we seem to have one big hold up, and that's with the transparency of the information we are using to derive at our figures, and developers have a different set of numbers, and we don't seem to be able to get around a table and discuss that and come to what is a rational and agreed upon outcome. Do you see a pathway through to actually achieve that sort of outcome?
It's our plan to develop a greater level of detail to support consideration of the investments that are proposed for the investment priority areas, and obviously given our timeframes starting with Drury. So there will be more information to support that. Certainly we would be wanting to engage with developers, so there'll be further round of consultation.
Thanks.
Okay, Bill. Right. Do I have any more questions for Andrew? No, I'll take that as a no. Do I have a motive for...
Kia ora.
Sorry.
Kia ora, Madam Chair.
Sorry, yes, David, you wanted to talk to your amendment. Apologies.
Oh, well, it's not my amendment, it's hopefully all of ours. But what I want to ask is, because this has come up through the workshops and stuff, why is it that treaty settlement lands aren't being exempt? Can I precursor that by saying, I use the analogy of this. The car was stolen, the spare tyre was returned as compensation. As we start to rebuild the car, someone comes and takes a slice of the tread off the spare wheel. So I ask you again, why treaty settlements not included as being exempt?
So the proposal included some treaty settlement land in some circumstances, but not others. The view was that, rather one view, because you've pointed out another view, that's the view that was taken in the officer's advice, was that to direct the resource to the developments that were most in need of support to be successful, and the consideration was that commercial development would be able to be successful without support from council, and that was the basis for the recommendation, so that the council resource could be directed where it would have the most impact on development.
I still don't believe that answers the question in terms of recognising the treaty settlement land and what it is, but compensation, and trying to get the quality of life back for Māori and the economy that they lost some many decades ago. And why we're not supporting the development of those assets in order to turn the economy back to where it should be, without having to take a slice of it every time they look at doing something. I mean, I can get where people will want not to see presidents like this, but this is a unique situation. This is not a normal day. This is what, you know, as I say, addressing the grievances of a long time, and yet we still got to take a little bit more off them before they even get started. So, I mean, I have to raise this because it's been raised through workshops by others being not supportive of that kind of thing. But I wanted to wait till today because, you know, I'm concerned about the Cultural Initiatives Fund being used, as I've said before, but with these proposals in here to at least assess correctly budgets that will be applied, because if you look at the last number of years, it's all been expended, and I'm concerned that the budget's not going to be big enough. So with F being included, that's very helpful in order to be, I guess, real about what the cost is and what that means. But I still can't get past the point where treaty settlement lands that are a compensation for grievances that have been undertaken, and that are also being used as an opportunity by local government to take more of that slice of their pie.
Yeah, Chair Taipri, I get that. I think it's pretty hard for staff to address that because it really is more around the government treaty settlement. But my understanding is that they are very happy to accept the addition of F, and probably just, yeah, I'd like to thank you for your comment.
Well, I'm just, well, it was a question, but again, I mean, that's dealing with like certain criteria of land by the Cultural Initiatives Fund. It's not addressing the overall situation of the effect you're having, or this council's having, on treaty settlement lands.
Yeah, get that. Look, we have another question from Councillor Hills, but just before that, I'm getting a whole lot of text to people who want to move and second it. So far I have, but the order that got in first, I've got Councillor Bartley and the Deputy Mayor. Councillor Hills, your question, please.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and hopefully I don't get cut off again. And granted, I was on leave when I've had a cursory look at all the presentations, but just with this policy, are we closer to addressing the funding? Does this get us closer to addressing the funding gap, or will we still have quite a large funding gap for this infrastructure that's needed? Does this even fill the gap of what is needed for future developments, especially in greenfield areas?
So you're correct that this is a advice on funding, and the proposed policy seeks to fully recover the growth share of the investments the council's committed to make in the 10-year budget. So there isn't a gap in that sense. The gap that my colleagues have identified when they worked you through the decisions on the 10-year budget is in our ability to finance the infrastructure in the first place. That's the first challenge. So there is no funding gap in regard to the infrastructure that we've included in our DC policy. There is the infrastructure investments beyond 2031. When we include them in the DC policy through the work that's been recommended in Resolution A, that will address the funding issues for the growth share, although any development that gets underway now or which is consented before these decisions are made wouldn't be required to pay DCs under those policies when they're adopted. That does present a funding challenge in that space, but that's something that councils always confront when they're working through these sorts of policy changes. We can't make the DC policy retrospective.
That's fine. And do you think, I guess, it's probably more your opinion potentially, but do you think this will help encourage more brownfield or development in urban areas than continued, not ease of greenfield, but I guess when you start looking at the cost recovery of the significant infrastructure investments, do you think it does or will play into future development, being closer to where the assets and infrastructure already is? Or do you think it's not big enough?
Our view has been that development contributions don't affect house prices. So while the housing market and the development market's not perfectly competitive and has many imperfections, it's not a monopoly market, and DCs won't affect house prices in the medium term. They'll flow through to land prices. Now, if we're going to take that view, then it would also have to be our view that it's not necessarily the case that DCs would affect where you choose to develop. They'll affect the land price of where you decide to develop, and you'll be thinking about what to pay for the land, what can I sell the house for. I'll also ask if Gary Blick or one of his team would like to contribute to this response and correct me if I got it wrong. So Gary, are you online? Chief Economist? Or Shamal? from the Chief Economist Unit.
Hey, Andrew, I'm here.
Right.
So just to clarify, the question was, would increasing the DCs in the IPAs, or according to this policy, result in a difference in development across brownfield areas or encourage brownfield development?
Yes.
There are two parts to this answer. One is the first part of this answer is that we know DCs have been artificially low in greenfield areas for obvious reasons. And two, that there are much, much greater infrastructure costs associated with providing for that greenfield development. When developers think of the pricing signals that influence their bidding for land, they factor in the cost of that DC into their bids. When the relative price differences between green and brownfield areas have that type of discrepancy, it is likely that developers favor the lower DC relative to the areas that would require a greater DC. When you bring those DCs closer together, then the incentive to favor a particular type of development that is further out is less so. The second part is that anything can still happen. If developers prefer a particular type of development and a particular area of development, then the DC changes in the DC is not going to necessarily influence their behavior. So in short, it depends.
Thank you for that answer, and that's kind of what I was thinking, but also that your last point kind of sort of clarifies that we're in an interesting space. But thank you very much. That was very fulsome. Thanks, Chair.
Appreciate that. Question now from Councillor Coombe.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I have a question, and apologies if this is quite, well, it's on the development contributions policy, and I know it's not what was consulted on, but what I would like to just clarify, Andrew, please, is where a community housing trust has, this particular issue came up, I should say, on Waiheke with the community housing trust looking to have their development contributions waived. I'm not quite sure how it was resolved, but I know it was resolved, which is great. But it just raises the question of, does the policy allow for discretion in terms of not-for-profit, social housing type developments, community-led? And is this something, well, if it's not in the policy now, is that something we would actually have to go out and consult on?
So the council considered this when it adopted its policy in the 2019 policy, and the advice was that if we wanted to support these activities, then we should do it directly with a grant, and on that basis the council could decide to expend money where it was going to get the most impact, that there was going to be no remissions or of DCs, but rather that if the council wished to support that kind of development, it did it directly with a grant. Because whether we provide a remission or a grant, the cost is the same to ratepayers, and the more efficient way to spend ratepayers' money is to do it directly when you can be sure that you're going to get the outcomes that you were seeking from that expenditure.
Thank you. Sorry, when did you say that that was the kind of the policy direction decided on?
That was the decisions the council made at its meeting in December 2018 when it adopted the contributions policy in 2019, and it's also consistent with the framework the council used to make amendments to its rates remission and postponement policy for a number of legacy remissions, which I think would have been perhaps around a similar time period.
Oh, thank you. That's really useful to have that clarification and a bit of background that I wasn't familiar with, because also I know that Chloe Shawbrook as MP for Auckland Central was wanting to get an understanding too and how she could support any change, but it's good that I can give her an update that it's through a grant process instead.
And I think it's one of the observations that may have been made in past debates as to whether the support of community housing development was perhaps a greater role for central government than local government, was one of the points that was made in the debate.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciated that opportunity.
Thanks, Councillor Coombe. I don't believe I have any more questions. I'm just checking. No, we'll move on to comments. Thank you, Andrew, very much. Very detailed report. I appreciate that. We'll move now, and first comment is the name of Councillor Cashmore.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Andrew. This is complicated, no matter what, and by the size of the increases, it's even more complicated. You take a place like Drury, which had a lot of publicity and a lot of funding from the Crown as well. You're 23,000 houses, you're building something the size of Napier. So yes, the infrastructure requirements are going to be substantial, but you compare that to Tamaki or the Roskill development or Mangere developments, and the brownfields doing at scale when you have to put all new in-ground infrastructure in and a lot of new transport infrastructure. There isn't a lot of difference in the figures, and I've got those numbers sadly, but they're back at the office. And in some cases, brownfields zero. We've got to have a bit of both, preferably a lot more brown, slightly less green. The other challenge is we've got to get the numbers right. Now, I heard my question, and for some reason, council staff aren't sharing the totality of their information with the developers for the justification for the large increases. Now, the developers are happy to pay more. They just want to make sure they're not being gouged. And that's fair comment. And I've been encouraging the staff to work with the developers around a table, honestly put the data on the ground. And there's arguments around why that is not happening. And I've had undertakings from Peter Gudstall and the planning team that they will do so again in the new year. It has happened to a bit, but there's been information withheld or information that's hard to attain or understand being put forward. So the clarity around the information is absolutely critical to get a better understanding from all between. The last point I want to make, Madam Chair, is that there's a potential, I believe, for a solution here for beyond the first 10 years. So the first 10 years infrastructure is fairly well tied up. You know what's going to be needed in a pretty good order of when it's going to need to be put forward and funded. The second 10 years is a lot more cloudy. Yeah. And I'm wondering if that second 10 years should be funded by all the development via an IFF from day one. That would help fund the stuff in the second decade and beyond. It would build up a bank account and they would enable that. So I'm hoping that's going to be included into the discussion. I've had a bit of a talk with Peter and to Andrew around that, and they're sort of intimating it could very well be part of the discussion and part of the solution, which would probably help land the policy next year with some certainty. So thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Andrew, and the team that's behind this. And Madam Chair, I'm happy to move.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Any other comments? Councillor Darby, Councillor Bartley, do you want to comment?
No comment from me. Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the report speaks for itself. It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah. Okay, I've got, we've got it all good to go. We've got it moved and seconded. I think we'll take it to the vote. Councillor Walker.
Just a very quick comment, Madam Chair. I have had some questions and comments, but I've made them offline with Andrew, and he's pulling some information together. So Andrew's familiar with that, aren't you, Andrew?
We're in comments, so Andrew's not at the table now, Councillor, but he has spoken to me and said he had a very informative discussion with you, so that is good. Right, I'll take it to the vote again. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye.
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 Aye. Carried. Thank you. Aye. And Andrew, I just want to back up the comments that other people have made. You've done an outstanding job on this. It's been very tricky. Item 16, committee members, is consideration of extraordinary business, and we don't have any. So item 17 is a procedural motion to exclude the public.
I'll move, Madam Chair. Kathy.
By Councillor
Collins.
And seconded by Collins. I'll take it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Committee members, I will ask you to leave this meeting and please join via the second confidential link, and there'll be a roll call taken before we start. Thank you.